What seemed like a simple Craigslist deal for a cheap dining table quickly turned into a nerve-wracking encounter I'll never forget. Let me share with you what happened to me. I use sites like Craigslist for the same reasons as everyone else. You can find expensive items at really discounted prices or cheap things for even less. I don't have much money, so these sites are essential for getting things like furniture, which are usually very expensive elsewhere. This incident occurred when I was looking for a dining room table. Ours was really old, and my family used it for eating and working, so it had seen better days. I searched on Facebook Marketplace, an OfferUp, but found nothing good. Most of the tables were still expensive, and the sellers wouldn't negotiate, so I turned to Craigslist. Around here, most people use other sites, but Craigslist still had the cheapest deals, even though they were rare. As soon as I opened the site and searched, a great listing appeared. It was a basic wooden dining table listed for only $100. Compared to the $400 to $500 others were asking, this was a steal. I messaged the seller saying I'd love to check it out and would pay the full price. He didn't reply immediately, so I hung out with my kids until around 7 when they went to get ready for bed. I checked my laptop and saw a response from a few minutes earlier. The seller apologized and said the table was going to be thrown out tomorrow morning, but if I really wanted it, I'd have to come by tonight or any time before 5 a.m. It was odd that he'd sell it at any time during the night, and his reasoning didn't make much sense. But after some thought, I replied saying I could pick it up right away. I didn't want to go very late or super early, but it was only 7, so it seemed fine. The man quickly replied, agreeing and sending the address. It was only 10 minutes away, so I told my wife where I'd be and headed out. You probably know I don't live in a fancy area. When I say the seller's house was really worn down, I mean it. It was small like the others around here, but the yard was full of trash and random items, surrounded by a thin chain link fence. I parked on the side, opened the fence, walked through the yard, and up to the already open door. I could hear people talking and laughing inside. I peeked in and lightly knocked on the door. Immediately, a man came around the corner and invited me in. He looked like he was in his mid-20s, probably late college. As I stepped inside, I couldn't help but notice how disgusting the place was. There were beer cans lying around and stains on the carpet. It looked like a house that hosted hundreds of college parties. The man was very laid back, casually walking me down the hallway into the kitchen while talking about how he didn't have room for the table anymore. In the kitchen, there were 2 other men around the same age, standing against the wall in the middle of a conversation. Next to them was the table. Somehow it looked almost untouched, which was surprising given the state of the house. I walked around it to check its stability. Suddenly, the house went silent. The 2 talking stopped, and the man selling the table didn't speak either. I looked up to see them all staring at me. Did I do something? I asked, looking at each of them. When my eyes fell on one of the men closest to me, I noticed his pupils were massive, like he was on drugs. I didn't know what he was on, but I knew this wasn't right. Not only was it strange, but I didn't want to buy a table from these people. I think I'm going to pass on it. Thank you, though, I said softly. I started walking toward the hallway, but one of them stepped in front of me, blocking my way. He didn't say anything, just stood there. Something about the way they were acting made me realize this was planned. They likely never meant to sell the table. Fear washed over me as I stood there, surrounded by strangers. Then, one of them whispered something in the other's ear, and they moved aside without a word. I cautiously walked between them, hurried down the hallway, and out the door. A lot went through my head on the drive home. I knew they were planning something terrible, but what and why they let me go, I don't know. When I got home, I told my wife, who convinced me to call the police. They couldn't do anything without something actually happening. Whatever those men were planning, I hope no one else has to find out. Selling shoes on Craigslist seemed harmless until I found myself at the mercy of a violent stranger. Let me tell you about a scary experience I had selling my shoes on Craigslist a year ago. I was trying to save up some extra cash to move out of my old apartment and hoped to use the money to pay for movers. The shoes weren't anything special, but I listed them at generous prices to sell them quickly. However, Craigslist wasn't the best place for shoes, and it took a whole week before I got an offer. This guy with an email named John K. offered just $5 less than my listing price. It seemed unnecessary to adjust the price, but I didn't want to wait longer, so I agreed. We arranged to meet the next day at 5 in the parking lot of a public gas station in the middle of town. The next day, I texted him, and he confirmed he was on his way, so I left and arrived at the gas station right at 5. John wasn't there yet, but there was a lot of traffic, so I figured he'd be late. I sat in my car patiently. Over the next 30 minutes, the roads cleared, and the sun started setting. Finally, John pulled in. He drove a small sedan with no working headlights, looking like it came from a scrapyard. He parked next to me and got out. John looked like he was in his 30s, a large guy with ripped clothes and long unkempt hair. He didn't say much, so I brought out the shoes and let him look at them. As he held the shoes, he kept looking back at the gas station. I didn't know what he was looking at, but after he checked over his shoulder multiple times, I glanced over too. The gas station was empty except for one guy pumping gas. I had no idea what John was looking at. John was taking his time, pointlessly examining the shoes multiple times as if they were some rare collectibles. But they were just regular sneakers, nothing special. Then John looked over his shoulder again, just as the car by the pump started to drive away. Suddenly, his whole demeanor changed. He stopped looking at the shoes and stared at me. "What else do you have?" he asked. I looked at him, confused. "Those are the only shoes I brought. I didn't know you were interested in others." His eyes went cold. He stepped past me and put his hand on my car door, trying to open it. It was locked. John immediately looked at me and told me to unlock it, his voice deep and threatening. I stared at him, trying to figure out what to do. There was no time to think. I unlocked the door, thinking he might just take a couple of random bills I had in the front. But then he said something unexpected. "Get in." He opened the passenger door and repeated, "Get in." I stood there, even more worried about where this was going. I looked around, hoping someone else was there, but the gas station was empty. No people or cars in sight. John grabbed my arm and pulled me to the door, taking my keys and shoving me into the car. He threw a few punches, landing on the right side of my face. I tried to get up, but John slammed the door against my head, making my vision blurry and everything fading in and out. I heard him start walking around the car, as if going to the driver's side. Then he suddenly turned around and sprinted back to his car. I was still out of it and barely remember what happened next. But I guess someone pulled in at the perfect time and confronted John, scaring him away. If they hadn't arrived, and John managed to drive away with me, I don't know what would have happened. Assuming his car was either stolen or untraceable to his name, then stealing my car and abducting me would have left no trace of our interaction. He would have had days, if not weeks, to do whatever he planned before anyone would even start looking for me. When a Craigslist buyer came to look at my lounge chairs, it quickly became clear he wasn't the only visitor I'd have that night. It was around this time last year when I decided to use Craigslist to sell a few things I needed to get rid of. My house was getting cluttered, and I planned to get some new furniture. With winter approaching, I wanted to get these items out quickly. The main pieces I was selling were 2 lounge chairs from my living room. They were big and a bit outdated, but still fully functional without any stains or rips. In about half a day, a few responses came in. 2 out of 3 gave me lowball offers, so there was only one serious buyer. He wanted to look at the chairs after work that day, around 6 or 6:30. I agreed, happy to get rid of them quickly. Usually I prefer meeting in public, but I had no way to transport the chairs, and even if I did, I couldn't lift them myself. So I sent him my address. By 6:00, I turned on the front porch light, opened the curtains, and sat in the living room, waiting for him. About 20 minutes later, a truck pulled into my driveway. The buyer took a few minutes before getting out and walking up to the door. I greeted him and let him in. He was an average-looking man, late 20s or early 30s, wearing typical work clothes. His name was Matt, and he started some small talk, explaining why he was excited about the chairs. He seemed nice, and I felt relieved that this would be quick and easy. Matt walked around the chair, sat in it, and seemed to enjoy it. We talked about the price, and he agreed to pay what I had listed. But just as we were about to exchange cash, we both heard a car door slam shut. It sounded like it came from the driveway where he parked his truck. Matt quickly went outside to check. I watched, unsure of what was happening. Through the window, I saw no other cars, so someone must have been messing with his truck. A minute later, Matt came back in, clearly angry. He said someone had stolen stuff from his car and seemed to distrust me, thinking I was involved. I assured him I wasn't, but I understood his skepticism, and I was also wary of him. Before we could work anything out, we heard footsteps approaching the front door. We turned to see a guy in a hoodie pushing the door open and stepping inside. The guy's eyes were bloodshot, and he looked deranged. His right hand was in his pocket, holding a very recognizable object. He stood just a few feet away, looking furious. He was young, maybe 18 or 19, but still dangerous. Matt and I stood still, trying not to provoke him. Matt tried to calm the kid, holding his hands up and taking a step closer. But the kid quickly pulled out the weapon and aimed it at Matt. It could have been fake, but we had no way to tell, and the kid's behavior made it seem real. The kid yelled at Matt to walk out the door. In shock, Matt complied. The kid followed him out, holding him at gunpoint all the way to the truck, where he made Matt get in the driver's seat and then got in the back. I watched in terror as they drove away, obviously against Matt's will. As soon as they were gone, I called 911 and then ran to my car to follow them, describing the situation to the operator. But they were gone. I couldn't find any sign of them. The police ran an investigation using the information I provided, quickly identifying who Matt was and his truck's license plate. For the next couple of days, I waited for a call, but it never came. Both Matt and his truck never turned up. I felt guilty, thinking I should have done more, but everything was so risky. I likely could have lost my life too. Even in those final moments, I didn't know if Matt was in on it as part of some elaborate plan. I don't know what that kid wanted or why any of it happened. It's been almost a year, and I don't think we'll ever know more. Desperate to get your hands on a PlayStation 3, you ventured into a Walmart parking lot at 2 a.m., only to find yourself face to face with a plainclothes cop and a nightmarish twist of corruption. So way back when the PS3 first came out, you really wanted one. I mean, you wanted one bad. The main reason was because you wanted to play Call of Duty 3, which is still your favorite game series ever. But since you missed out on pre-ordering one, you were out of luck when the actual release date came. You remember watching eBay like a hawk, scouring Craigslist every day, and day after day went by with no luck at all. But then, boom. You see this one post on Craigslist that says a guy is selling his brand new PlayStation 3, Call of Duty 3 included, and he's selling both of them for like $400, at least $100 below asking price. The only thing was, he needed to sell it as soon as possible, and he needed someone to drive over to him to pick it up. The person who could pay his asking price and pick up promptly got the package. Somehow you got fortunate, incredibly so. A lot of folks were messaging him for it, and some sounded like they were going to rob him. You were older than most of the wannabe buyers, so you texted him a picture of the cash and arranged to meet in a Walmart parking lot that night to pick it up. You felt like a kid at Christmas. Granted, most kids don't drive to Santa to pay him $400 to get their presents, but still, you were majorly excited to pick it up. The trouble was, the guy was working late that night, so you'd have to drive over to the Walmart parking lot at like 2 in the morning to pick it up. I know what you're thinking, Walmart parking lot at 2 a.m. Something bad was always going to happen. And yeah, you'd be lying if you said it hadn't crossed your mind when you were thinking about the whole thing. but you wanted that stupid World War II game so badly that it outweighed whatever good sense you had. So that's how you ended up in the Walmart parking lot in South Hanover, way after dark. Like you said, there was always a chance something bad was going to happen. You just figured it'd be from the other end of the law. You were just sitting there waiting when you heard someone tapping on the glass of your driver's side window, and you saw the gun. You thought you were getting carjacked or something. They got you out of the car at gunpoint, but then when you saw the badge on the dude in plain clothes, you honestly breathed a sigh of relief at first. You knew your reason for being there sounded sketchy. Picking up a PlayStation 3 at 2 in the morning would have sounded really suspicious if you were a cop. But then when they pulled the $400 in cash out of your wallet and said they were confiscating it as suspected earnings from drugs, you started to get really angry. You told them to search your car for drugs or guns or whatever they were looking for. If they didn't find anything, they had no right to take your money. One of the cops smirked when you said that though, screaming up in your face and threatening to smack you. His partner had to calm him down, like he was legitimately worried that he was about to punch you. The angry cop walked back to their unmarked car, and the other cop wrote up a ticket for the cash they took. While he did that, he apologized for his partner and promised if you brought some pay stubs to the precinct, you'd get all your money back. No problems, you were angry. You were probably going to miss out on the PlayStation, but you figured the guys were just doing their jobs and getting it taken by them was much better than getting straight up robbed and carjacked by dudes that wouldn't have been so reluctant to beat you down. Because you figured you could still get your hands on the PlayStation, you drove over to the precinct first thing in the morning with some pay stubs, which you figured would prove the money was yours. You got there, handed in your ticket, and some cop walked out with an evidence bag with your money in it. Only you were shocked when she put it down in front of you. You told her there must be some kind of mistake. You told her the cops pulled you out of your car and took exactly $400 off of you, but in the bag there was no more than $100. She then showed you the ticket, and in the little box that listed confiscated items it said 100 instead of 400. Right then it was your turn to freak out. You couldn't believe they did you like that. You started demanding complaint forms, numbers to call, all of that. The lady just thought you were lying about the amount, but you swore you had more money than that. She gave you the number to call to register a complaint, which you did. I know. Cops taking bribes around Baltimore is probably only raising eyebrows with the most naive of you. But missing out on the PS3 wasn't the scary thing. The scary thing was coming home from work 3 days later and seeing a car you didn't recognize parked across the street. You didn't immediately assume anything bad, you just wondered who in the neighborhood got themselves a new set of wheels. That's when you saw him. The same plainclothes cop that wanted to tee off on you that night. The same cop who took your money. He just looked at you dead in the eyes and smiled before driving off down the block. It was just like a warning or something, just to tell you he knew you made the complaint. If criminals or gangsters do stuff that shakes you up, sure, but it makes sense. Those guys are supposed to rob you or shoot you or whatever. But when it's the cops doing it, the same people who are supposed to protect you, who are you supposed to protect you? Who are you supposed to turn to? A Craigslist deal for used furniture led you to a house full of old memories and a confrontation with the very man who almost destroyed your family decades earlier. Back when I was about 4 or 5 years old, my mom and I went to stay with my grandparents for the weekend. My dad left before I was born, so it was always just me and my mom. My grandparents were a huge part of my life growing up. We would go over on Friday night and stay until late on Sunday. This was mainly so my mom could have a social life or work weekend shifts at her job. One dark Sunday evening around the holidays, I remember being carried out to the car, half asleep already. I must have fallen asleep the moment I was strapped into the car seat because I don't even remember driving off. The next thing I remember, I felt the cold on my face and heard my mom crying and begging someone not to hurt her because I was in the car. I looked outside and saw what I thought was a monster at the time, but I later learned it was a man in a bunny mask. It was like the masks in the slasher movie You're Next, not some flimsy plastic thing. It was super detailed and really creepy looking. The guy and his partner had basically staged a car accident to get my mom to pull over. When she did, the man in the bunny mask attacked us. They robbed us, did something unspeakable to my mom, and almost killed her. She spent almost 2 weeks in the hospital. I lived with my grandparents for almost a whole year because my mom was in and out of various institutions. The whole thing messed her up so bad. I didn't get away scot-free either. I had nightmares about a bunny monster chasing my mom for years. But time is the greatest healer, and as I got older, things eventually got better. We started to live a somewhat normal life again. Fast forward to when I was 24. I was still living with my mom but looking for an apartment because I got a decent paying job with my college degree. The place I found came unfurnished, so I was looking for cheap furniture and decor. One of the first places I checked was Craigslist. In the for sale section, I saw some pretty sweet items at bargain prices. I contacted one of the sellers and discovered it was a guy's granddaughter selling off his stuff to pay for a care home. The girl seemed really nice, and she even promised me a discount if I bought a bunch of stuff in bulk, which suited me because I needed a lot quickly. We arranged for me to go over to her grandpa's place to check out the stuff before I handed over the cash. On a Saturday afternoon, I drove over to the house to start haggling. She introduced herself and was really sweet, but when I saw her grandpa, I realized why they needed the money for a care home. He was in a really bad way. He was in a wheelchair, had an oxygen tank, and barely reacted to his granddaughter introducing me. He looked like he didn't have too many years left. I checked out the main items on my list: a closet, a desk, and a dinner table. We agreed on a price. I needed to arrange a U-Haul to pick them up, but that could be done the following weekend. After we confirmed the purchases, the granddaughter and I had some coffee. She explained that almost everything in the house was for sale. Apparently, her grandpa had been a wild child in his youth and had been in and out of jail. He didn't have a lot saved up for a rainy day. She also mentioned that everything in the garage was for sale too, and I was welcome to check it out. I figured I'd buy a few more things from them, maybe stuff they couldn't sell easily, to help decorate my apartment and support a worthy cause. After finishing the coffee, she went to help her grandpa with something, and I headed to the garage. The garage was piled high with stuff. There were old cookie jars, books, weird little ornaments, and all kinds of things. I started digging through the pile, placing items I considered buying to one side. Then I spotted something that froze me in place. It was a bunny mask, dirty and old, but I recognized it immediately. It was the same design as the one worn by the guy who attacked my mom. I stared at it for a few seconds, then stumbled back in disbelief. I told myself there was no way it was the exact same one. It looked like a mass-produced Easter bunny mask, but then I started piecing it together. Her grandpa had been in and out of prison. It made a horrible kind of sense. I tried to pull myself together, bundled up the stuff I pulled out from the trash pile, and carried it into the house. I put on a fake smile, paid for the stuff, and asked the girl what her grandpa had gone to jail for. She was taken aback and didn't know exactly. She just knew he didn't talk about it, and neither did her mom. I insisted on thanking him personally, even though the girl said he might not respond. She let me go into his room, probably thinking I was sweet but strange. As I walked in, there he was, staring into space. I sat down near him, arranging my thoughts. I asked him where he was living around December of 1987. He didn't react. I was about to leave, thinking I might confuse or upset him, but I couldn't leave without asking more questions. I asked if he had robbed a woman with a kid in the car around Christmas that year. His eyes shifted as if he was remembering. I told him I thought I knew what one of his sentences was for. His jaw began to tremble, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. I told him I knew it was him. His reaction confirmed it. Tears welled up in his eyes. I didn't care what he wanted to say at that point. I just said, "You almost ruined my life. You don't deserve to be in that chair." He whimpered as I stood up and walked out. The girl thanked me as I left, and I disguised my emotions by telling her we had an emotional exchange of gratitude. I hope she never finds out the truth. I got back into my car and only made it about 2 blocks before I pulled over and started bawling. I was filled with doubt, wondering if I had just distressed a sick old man. But another part of me kept saying, that was him. I know it was him. I drove to my mom's place and told her about it. We both cried when she said she also thought it was the same guy. She said someone was caught for what happened and was sent to jail. She had to appear in court to testify, which weighed heavily on her mental health. I had no idea anyone was caught. I always thought no one had been arrested. When I described what the guy looked like, it clicked for her. It seemed like perfect karma for the guy, like a fitting end to his story. In the months that followed, it felt like a great weight had been lifted from our shoulders. Nothing could ever change the past, but knowing the guy was suffering felt like proof there was a God. I know it might sound a little unhinged, but I can't think of another way to phrase it. I still don't quite believe in happy endings, and I still think the world is a cold, cruel place. But I know from experience that there is such a thing as divine justice. When a beloved radio host failed to show up for work, police discovered a grisly scene and unraveled a dark web of betrayal involving a teenager and a fatal, twisted encounter. You were born in Philadelphia on March 23, 1961, and you fell in love with talk radio from a very young age. You dreamed of working in the industry, and for many years you lived that dream by working at the WABC 77 morning show. You read out periodic news updates throughout the morning and joined in conversations with the hosts about those news stories. Those who tuned in became very familiar with the sound of your voice. In April 2008, you moved from WABC to the ABC radio network. Over the next 11 months, you focused on local interest stories that you personally investigated. To your coworkers, you seemed to live a quiet and unassuming life. But after you failed to show up for work on March 21, 2009, it was discovered that your private life was very different from your public persona. On that Saturday morning, when you failed to show up for work, your coworkers became concerned. On the few days that you took off due to sickness, you always called ahead. By mid-afternoon, when you still had not contacted them, your coworkers called 911 and asked the police to check on you. On Sunday, March 22nd, 2 patrol officers arrived at your apartment around 8:30 in the morning. At first, they noticed nothing out of the ordinary, but on closer inspection, they detected the sound of running water from somewhere in the apartment. That alone wouldn't normally be any cause for alarm, but coupled with the fact that you failed to answer the door when the officers announced themselves, it made for a very ominous situation. Around 15 to 20 minutes after they first arrived on the scene, the patrol officers forced their way into your apartment. Once they did, they discovered a truly horrifying sight. You were lying naked on your bedroom floor in a pool of your own blood. Your arms and legs were bound tight with rope, and your bloody corpse had been mutilated by around 50 stab wounds to your neck, chest, and arms. The sound of running water was coming from the bathroom, and the blood around the taps and sinks suggested that your killer had attempted to clean themselves off before escaping during the night. During the examination of the crime scene, the attending officers found no signs of forced entry, leading them to believe that you had known and trusted your attacker enough to welcome them into your home. With this in mind, homicide detectives began scouring your computer and phone in the hopes of finding any evidence of grudges or arguments between you and your friends or neighbors. This is how they discovered a message exchange between you and a 16-year-old high school student named John Curtis. The text message threads and call logs taken from your phone suggested that you and Curtis had arranged to meet on the night of Friday, March 20th, and that the purpose of the meeting had been less than wholesome. You had met after you posted on Craigslist that you were seeking a night of passion with a younger man. The timing of your exchanges suggested that Curtis had been one of the last people to see you alive. But after trying to bring him in for questioning, the police discovered that the boy was less than willing to give himself up. Not only that, but a deep dive into Curtis's background brought up some very disturbing information. According to his social media profiles, John Curtis was a self-declared Satanist with a penchant for extreme sadism. When the police reached out to his family, they confirmed that John was a deeply troubled young man. His father was appalled by the allegations and agreed to take part in a sting that would bring his son to justice. The father contacted Curtis and convinced him to return to his East Elmhurst home to collect $300. When Curtis returned to collect the money, he was promptly arrested. At his trial, Curtis was charged as an adult, and although he pled not guilty to a charge of second-degree murder, he was convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life. In the aftermath of his imprisonment, some true crime aficionados cited the Curtis case as an example of a lethal hate crime on homosexual men, where the perpetrator exhibited some degree of homosexuality themselves. To them, it was a crime of projected self-hatred. But to others, your murder was something considerably more disturbing. Some argued that Curtis had targeted a desperate older man simply to secure access to his home. Under the guise of a bedroom game, Curtis was able to bind his prospective victim before sacrificing him in the name of Satan. Others argued that rather than the murder being satanic, Curtis killed you when it became clear that you were a child abuser, and that Curtis's involvement with you was merely a sting to seek out and punish someone willing to sleep with an underage boy. It's almost impossible to establish any of these theories as fact. All that Curtis's lawyer argued in court was the idea that you and his client had been involved in a long-term but violently unstable relationship. Whether or not this is true, the judge and jury took no mercy on the 16-year-old who was condemned to spend the rest of his youth in a federal correctional facility. Maybe one day John Curtis will properly explain why he killed you, but it's just as likely that your family will forever be in the dark as to why their loved one had to die. I just finished my studies and needed a small place to live while I looked for a job. I was working part-time at a little grocery store, but now that I was done with school, it was time to find something better. Renting an apartment by myself was too expensive, so I was on the lookout for a room to rent in someone's house. I knew it would be a bit uncomfortable at first living with strangers, but I didn't really have another option. My friend from school who used to share a room with me told me to try Craigslist. It seemed that other websites didn't list single rooms or were too complicated to use. Craigslist had a lot of choices, so I decided to stick with it. After several days, I was getting nowhere. Nobody answered my messages, and the few who did just said the room was already taken. Then, on a Saturday morning, I saw a new listing. It was close, affordable, and looked decent. A man named John was offering a large house with an available bedroom which also had its own bathroom and closet. It seemed perfect. So I sent him an email to show my interest and then went off to my job. Since the ad was fresh that morning, I was hopeful I was the first to reach out. During my lunch break, I checked my emails and saw that John had replied. He wanted me to come and see the place that same afternoon. I knew I'd be tired after work, but I really wanted this room, so I agreed, and we set a time. After my shift, I drove there, taking only about 10 minutes. The house looked good from the outside, just a normal house in a regular neighborhood. I parked my car nearby and walked up to the door to knock softly. After waiting a little, I knocked again, a bit louder. Just as I was about to text John, he opened the door to let me in. He was covered in sweat, as though he'd just been exercising, and he didn't smell nice at all. I didn't want to seem rude, so I didn't mention it. He started showing me around the first floor, pointing out the kitchen and living room. He said he hardly used these rooms, so I wouldn't be in his way, but looking around, it seemed like he used them a lot. The kitchen sink was overflowing with dirty dishes, and the couch was stained all over. The house was a lot messier than I expected, especially since the photos made it look so clean. One thing that really stood out to me was the couch in the living room. The picture showed a brown leather couch, but the one I saw was black. I guess John might have used old photos of the house from before. This felt a bit dishonest, but I was mainly interested in my room, which was upstairs. John led me to the stairs and then stopped, gesturing for me to go up first. I felt really uneasy as I climbed the stairs, especially since John stayed at the bottom just smiling and telling me my room was the first one on the left. When I reached the top and was about to go to my room, I heard a soft noise from behind the door. I looked back at John, and his smile was gone. "Is there someone else living here?" I asked. He sounded annoyed and said it was just a friend staying over and I shouldn't worry. He told me to go look at the room, insisting I would like it. By then, I was scared. Why didn't you mention his friend earlier, I thought. It felt like something I should have known. I wanted to leave immediately. I tried to sound confident as I told John the place wasn't right for me and started back down the stairs. He didn't seem happy and blocked the bottom of the stairs. I stopped a few steps away, insisting I had to leave. He tried once more to get me to see the room, but I refused. After a moment, he surprisingly stepped aside with a smile, letting me pass. I rushed out the door. Something was off about that house. I felt fortunate to get out so easily. I'd feared I might need to push my way out. Later, I checked Craigslist, and the ad was gone. I often think about what was in that room. Maybe it was empty, but I feel it was something far worse. When I was in college, I used to go camping with friends during the summer. One year, we decided to explore a new area we hadn't visited before. It was a dense forest quite far from the city. We were excited about the adventure and prepared all our gear, including tents, food, and a map of the area. After driving for several hours, we arrived and found a good spot to set up our camp. There were 5 of us: Mike, Sarah, Alex, John, and me. The first day went smoothly. We hiked a few trails, swam in a nearby lake, and enjoyed a campfire at night. However, things started getting strange on the second night. As we were sitting around the campfire, we heard rustling in the bushes. We assumed it was just a small animal and didn't pay much attention. But then, the noises got louder, and it felt like something or someone was watching us. Mike, being the bravest among us, grabbed a flashlight and walked towards the noise. We followed him, feeling a bit nervous. We didn't see anything unusual at first, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Eventually, we shrugged it off and went back to the campfire. Later that night, as we were getting ready to sleep, Sarah screamed. We all rushed to her tent, where she pointed out that her backpack was missing. We searched the entire campsite but couldn't find it. We thought maybe an animal had dragged it away. We tried to sleep, but the feeling of unease kept us awake. The next morning, we decided to pack up and leave a day early. We were all a bit spooked and didn't want to stay another night. As we were packing, we found Sarah's backpack hanging from a tree branch, about 20 feet off the ground. It was impossible for any of us to have put it there. We quickly packed the rest of our gear and left. To this day, none of us can explain what happened that night in the forest. We never went back to that area again. When I was a kid, my family moved into an old house in a small town. It was a beautiful large house with a lot of character, but it was also quite old. My parents were excited about the house, and my siblings and I quickly found our favorite spots. The house had a big backyard, perfect for playing, and a cozy attic filled with all sorts of interesting old things. One evening, about a month after we moved in, I was in my room playing with my toys when I heard a strange noise coming from the attic. It sounded like someone was walking around up there. I called out to my parents, but they were downstairs and didn't hear me. Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to check it out myself. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way up the creaky stairs to the attic. When I reached the top, I shone the flashlight around, but didn't see anything unusual. Just as I was about to go back down, I heard the noise again, this time closer. I turned around quickly and saw a shadow move across the wall. My heart started racing, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the noise continued. It sounded like soft footsteps coming towards me. I gathered all my courage and called out, "Who's there?" There was no answer, but the footsteps stopped. I slowly backed away towards the stairs, keeping the flashlight pointed ahead. Suddenly, I felt a cold breeze pass by me, and the flashlight flickered. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could and didn't stop until I reached my parents. I told them what had happened, but they assured me it was probably just the old house settling or the wind. I wanted to believe them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the attic. After that night, I avoided the attic as much as possible. Whenever I had to go up there, I made sure it was during the day and that someone else was with me. Even now, years later, I still get a little uneasy thinking about that old house and the strange noises in the attic. One summer, my friends and I decided to take a road trip across the country. We planned to visit various landmarks and camp out at different spots along the way. We were excited about the adventure and spent weeks preparing for the trip. We packed all the essentials, made a detailed itinerary, and set off early one morning. Our journey was going well, and we had a lot of fun visiting different places. One night, we found a secluded camping spot near a forest. It was perfect quiet, beautiful, and far from any busy roads. We set up our tents, built a campfire, and enjoyed a relaxing evening under the stars. As it got late, we decided to get some sleep. We were exhausted from the day's activities and fell asleep quickly. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange noise. It sounded like whispering, but I couldn't make out any words. I thought maybe one of my friends was talking in their sleep, so I tried to go back to sleep. But the whispering continued and seemed to be getting closer. I sat up and looked around the tent, but I couldn't see anything. I unzipped the tent slightly and peered outside. The campfire had died down and everything was dark. Suddenly, I heard the whispering right next to my ear. I jumped and looked around, but there was no one there. My heart was pounding, and I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. I quickly woke up my friends and told them what happened. They looked around but didn't find anything unusual. We decided to stay awake for the rest of the night, taking turns keeping watch. When morning came, we packed up and left the campsite as quickly as we could. We were all on edge and didn't want to stay another night there. As we drove away, we tried to rationalize what had happened, but none of us could come up with a good explanation. The experience left us shaken, and we made sure to choose more populated campsites for the rest of our trip. When I was younger, my friends and I loved exploring abandoned places. We would often go on adventures to find old, deserted buildings and see what we could discover. One day we heard about an old, abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. It had been closed for years, and there were rumors that it was haunted. Naturally, we decided we had to check it out. We planned to go there on a Saturday night. We gathered our flashlights, cameras, and some snacks, and set off around sunset. It was a bit of a drive to get there, but we were all excited. When we finally arrived, the hospital looked even creepier than we had imagined. The building was large and looming, with broken windows and overgrown weeds all around it. We made our way inside through a side door that was slightly ajar. The interior was dark and musty, with peeling paint and scattered debris. We stuck together as we explored, moving slowly and quietly through the hallways. Every now and then we would hear strange noises, but we tried to brush them off as the wind or animals. After about an hour of exploring, we found a set of stairs leading down to the basement. It was dark and the air felt colder as we descended. When we reached the bottom, we saw a long hallway with several doors on either side. We decided to split up and check the rooms, agreeing to meet back in the hallway in 10 minutes. I took the first room on the left. It was small and empty, with just an old bed frame and some scattered papers. As I was looking around, I heard a soft humming sound. It was faint at first, but it gradually grew louder. I stepped out into the hallway, and the humming stopped. I called out to my friends, but there was no response. I started to feel uneasy. Suddenly, one of the doors at the end of the hallway slammed shut. I jumped and ran towards it, thinking maybe one of my friends was playing a prank. But when I reached the door and opened it, the room was empty. The humming started again, this time louder and more intense. I felt a cold breeze and a sense of dread washed over me. I ran back to the hallway, shouting for my friends. They came rushing out of their rooms, all looking just as scared as I felt. We decided it was time to leave. As we hurried up the stairs and back through the hospital, we kept hearing the humming and strange noises behind us. We didn't stop until we were back outside, breathing heavily and feeling a mix of fear and relief. We never went back to that hospital. The experience left us all shaken, and we decided to stick to exploring less creepy places from then on. To this day, we still talk about that night and wonder what was making those noises in the basement. As an actor struggling for steady work, I never expected a simple dishwasher repair job to turn into a fight for my life. My name is Mark, and I'm an actor. You probably haven't seen anything I've been in. Despite all the auditions I've attended, steady work has been scarce for me. My wife, Gretchen, works at a bank, and I take on part-time jobs at a coffee shop to contribute financially when I'm not pursuing acting. I also help around the house to ease Gretchen's burden as the main breadwinner. One day, Gretchen suggested I take on side gigs to supplement our income. Unsure of where to start, she advised me to check online for nearby opportunities. Skilled in construction and renovation, I searched Craigslist and quickly found a post from a man named Jonathan. He lived close by and needed help fixing his dishwasher door. Confident I could handle the task, I emailed him. After exchanging a few messages, I agreed to go to his place that afternoon. Jonathan seemed nice when I arrived. He led me to his kitchen, which was far nicer than ours, indicating he was well off. The only thing out of place was his old, broken dishwasher door. As I inspected the damage, Jonathan poured me a glass of lemonade. When I asked what caused the damage, he casually said it was old. However, I could tell he was lying. The door had scratches and yanked out screws, suggesting deliberate damage. Suspicious? I decided not to drink the lemonade. Pretending to take a sip, I kept my lips shut. I then asked Jonathan for a towel, and while he fetched it, I discreetly poured the lemonade down the sink. When he returned, I acted as though I had finished the drink. He smiled and told me to take my time before leaving the room. Although fearful, I wasn't certain Jonathan had tried to poison me. With him out of sight, I quickly fixed the dishwasher door, which took about 10 minutes. Just as I was about to leave, Jonathan appeared behind me, commenting that I looked woozy. His expectation of my reaction confirmed my suspicions. To ensure my safe exit, I pretended to feel dizzy and stumbled slightly. Jonathan suggested I sit while he got my payment and guided me toward the living room, where I noticed a rope on the table. Sensing his plan to tie me up, I insisted on immediate payment via Venmo, saying I needed to get home. Ignoring his protests, I hurried to the door and opened it, only to find Gretchen standing there. Without a word, she entered, forcing me to step back. Confused, I asked what was happening. She placed a hand on my chest before shoving me onto the couch. Turning to Jonathan, she inquired if I had drunk everything. He confirmed, amazed I was still standing. They both looked at me, and Jonathan explained that Gretchen needed a real man in her life, implying their plan to get rid of me. Gretchen pulled a knife from her purse, advancing towards me. Jonathan grabbed my arm, attempting to tie me up, but I kicked him hard, causing him to stumble into Gretchen. She accidentally stabbed him, and as Jonathan screamed in pain, I fled the house. I drove to a busy street and called the police, who instructed me to come to the station and give a statement. They warned me not to return to Jonathan's house. Within an hour, the police found evidence supporting my story at Jonathan's house, including traces of sleeping medicine in the glass and the bloody knife. However, they couldn't locate Jonathan or Gretchen. It's been 3 weeks, and I'm still waiting for the police to find them. They're still on the run. Moving to a new town for a teaching job seemed like a fresh start, until a Craigslist rental offer led me to witness something horrific. My name is Evan. Last year I got a new teaching job in Asheville, North Carolina. I had never been there before, but the job was perfect, and I couldn't say no. I instantly accepted the offer. I had to find an apartment within my price range, but I was shocked at how expensive Asheville was. The rent was more than double what I could afford. I looked all over but couldn't find anything reasonable. While I was staying in a pretty gross hotel in Nashville, someone suggested I look for places on Craigslist. I had never used Craigslist before and always thought it was a bit sketchy, but I was desperate. So I went to the rental listings and found a guy named Andy who wanted to rent out a room in his condo. I didn't like the idea of sharing a bathroom and kitchen with someone I had never met, but the address was literally down the street from my new job. I emailed him to tell him I was interested. We exchanged some messages and eventually agreed to a Zoom meeting so we could see if we were compatible. When I saw his face on my computer screen, I was instantly relieved. He seemed like such a nice, honest guy. He answered all my questions and gave me a really good first impression. During our meeting, he was sitting at his table with the kitchen counter just behind him. I couldn't see a lot of the house, but what I did see looked nice. I asked if he could move his laptop around and give me a virtual tour of the place, but he said he wanted to clean up a little first. He told me this meeting was just to figure out if we were personally compatible. That should have been a red flag for me, but I trusted him. I was about to end the call when I noticed something moving on the floor behind him. It was a little black lump. I leaned closer to my computer to get a better look, and he noticed my expression because he spun around in his chair. Instantly, he jumped up and ran into the kitchen. By then, I could see more of the black lump. It looked like someone's head covered in a garbage bag. It was some poor guy wrapped in a bag, and he wasn't dead. I couldn't see most of him because the kitchen counter was in the way, but I could still see him writhing on the floor. Andy ran toward him and kicked his head until the body was once again hidden behind the counter. He stood there for a second looking down. I think he was waiting for the body to stop moving. Then he casually walked back to his computer screen. I was so focused on what I had just seen that I completely forgot I was still on Zoom. He could still see me. He looked right into my eyes, his face weirdly blank. "So you saw that," he said. He sounded like I had just caught him jaywalking or something. I didn't move. "Yeah, I figured," he said. Then he ended the Zoom call. I don't know how long I sat there completely frozen, processing what had just happened. 1 second, I was having a friendly chat with this nice, normal guy. The next, I was watching a murder. It didn't feel real. Slowly, realization set in. I was in danger, I was a witness, and Andy would come for me. I couldn't imagine what he was capable of. I had to figure out if he could track me down. Thankfully, Craigslist uses temporary email accounts to protect its clients, so Andy didn't have my email. We had never exchanged phone numbers or shared our last names, so he didn't have those either. All he had was my Zoom address. Was that enough to find me? Maybe, but it would take him a while. Even if he had all my contact information, he didn't know my hotel room. I'd be safe for now. All I had to do was call the police and tell them everything. I reached for my phone and dialed 911. I told the dispatcher everything. It took a while because I wanted to include every detail while it was fresh in my brain. I knew they would record those calls for later. Then I told her I was driving straight to the station and hung up. I went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. I think I was still in shock, at least a little bit. That seemed to help. Then I grabbed my keys and left. When I opened the hotel door, Andy was waiting on the other side. In the time it took me to talk to the police, he had driven across the street and found me. I felt so stupid for not going to the police station immediately. He shoved me backwards and walked inside before I could stop him.